Good morning. I just made it. Yes, welcome. I'm sorry. Welcome to Sunrise. My name is Alero Edu.
Am I working there? Good morning and welcome. Well, it's strange to her. I do it every day.
Well, the traffic isn't like this every day, is it?
Verily, verily, I say unto thee, it's sometimes.
It's
Because, you know, broadcast ethics, you want to leave home well ahead of time.
Indeed,
so
because the show must go on.
Because the show must go on. So I leave home today, for instance. I left home even late. I left at 6:25, no, at 6:17. No, 6:25, and that's late for me.
And you live just behind?
I live 20 minutes tops, leisure driving. On a good day, leisure driving, 20 minutes.
Away.
If I really drive like a Lagos guy, 12, 15 minutes in the office, you know, but there is need for that all the time.
But the question now is, when do they plan to finish this road?
Well, if you remember what the former Minister of Works and Housing said, June 30. Don't forget that time when you were asking, will the major highway be done by the deadline?
Was it March 30th or April 30th?
The date that the minister said at the time, I told you, no, it was the 29th. I told you, well, today is 28.
So they should be through in 24 hours.
I don't know. We don't have any fresh information at the time. But now what we heard, the last we heard was 30th of June. Is it likely to happen? I'm not today. What's today's date?
Today is the 17th.
17. So we have just 2 days shy of 15 days before that June 30 happens.
Yeah.
Whether or not we will have some additional information before that time, we wait to see. But don't forget, it's a lot of work. I mean, I have to, for instance, one of those wings at Berger bus stop, I saw the depth of the dig. Couldn't be anything less. Couldn't be anything less than, I'm 6'2", couldn't be anything less than half my body. Even more higher than half my body. That was dug, just so that the road would be, you know, solid. So it's a lot of work that has been done.
Because it's a very busy road.
Extremely. And if you do a shallow job, you know...
It's like everybody going out of Lagos has to use this road.
And, you know, don't also forget what the minister said at some point. It's a 40,000 vehicular traffic every day. And that's an average. So sometimes it could be more, sometimes it could be less. But 40,000, and then they can't stop. You can't cut the road and say, okay, no traffic
for
today.
The next 3 days.
Yeah, we have to.
Or 2 days, we have because we're working.
Exactly.
It can't happen.
The work has to go on. And that's the way everything all over I don't know if it's the same vehicular traffic in all various parts of the country.
And those who are going towards the south, who have the option of the Ekpe axis, that road is also being fixed.
So it's a lot of work. I mean, what I've always said is, look, let government just communicate with the people.
Yeah.
And then once you communicate with people, people shouldn't have any problem understanding that, okay, these are the issues, these are the challenges. Because this road is very old. It's been since 1977 or 79.
Something like that.
It's been on since it's been commissioned since the 70s.
75 or something, because I was in university. I was just leaving when it happened.
Good. So, yeah. I mean, it's been for that length of time. So it's a very, very old road.
It needed to be fixed, yes.
And then, I don't know what kind of road maintenance, because I know that there is the Public Works Department of the federal and state governments.
FERMA.
Now FERMA.
Yeah.
Then it was just Public Works,
yes. PWD.
PWD of the federal government at the time. How efficient they have been, or they are, or they should have been to get the jobs done and ensure that, you know, these roads are maintained. It's another thing altogether. The road, the top layers of the roads being made that I am seeing is 2 top layers I'm talking about the tar. The black layers are two or three. So if anything is going to go wrong with the road, it takes it in layers. So if anything happens to the first layer,
there's a second one.
There's a second one, but something going wrong with the first layer should tell you, fix it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get to the second layer.
That's right.
That's the challenge that we've had, over time. There are roads like, I went to Ibadan once and, my God, I saw roads.
Talking about going to Ibadan, I went to Ibadan and I went by train.
Oh.
And, okay, number one, the train left dead on time. On the nose, it left. The train was clean, spotlessly clean. And I'm wondering, is it because the traffic is not heavy? The air conditioning,
Top
maximum.
notch.
Efficient.
Wow.
My only issue was, why couldn't I buy my ticket in advance? And why did I have to pay in cash at the station? And these are questions that I would like somebody at the Nigerian Railways to actually
answer, my friend.
Is blowing in the wind. This one cannot blow in the wind because Nigerians would also like to know the answer to that.
See,
there were people carrying POS machines.
I happened to be in the office of public servants about 2 weeks ago. And I was asking, can't we have a paperless system?
Yeah.
And he said he's proposed it 1 or 2 times.
But it was shut down.
And the people who are supposed to be like, what will we eat? Now,
and that is actually accepted.
Don't carry placard yet. And I'm talking about Lagos State. What's happening in other states?
What will we eat?
And one of my colleagues, I think it was Chamberlain, served at one of these states up north. I don't know which of the north, west, east, central. He said, look, that the local government officials where he served only went to work once a month.
Not even, I was going to say a week.
Once a month.
Just to collect salary.
Collect, share, and leave for another time. You see, we need to get to that point. You see, what you saw at the railway, corporation is just a microcosm of what happens everywhere. You remember at the ports, they're supposed to have digitized the process. Is it still as digitized as it was now? Now, the system we are using, it's not that these things can't be done. Why is it so easy at the airports? That you just book your flights, you check yourself in before you get to the airport. You just collect your check-in slip and then you go.
Well, the boarding part, but there's still all kinds of actions.
But the core thing is at least you check yourself in, out and all of those things. Those processes, someone needs to wield the big stick. So that will probably be something that the Minister of Transport, whoever the Minister of Transport is going to be, has to take very, very seriously. Because
Mr. Okiria, this is all for your information.
The Mr. Okiria is okay. For instance, one of the things that this fellow told me when he was suggesting, why don't we just digitize this? He said, it means you have to change the civil service rules.
Oh, okay.
So
what's wrong with changing the civil service rule? This is 2023. When those rules were written, there were no computers. There are computers now.
Chief Afe Babalola suggested that the National Assembly should just be collecting sitting allowance.
Yes.
Who is going to make the law?
They are.
Okay, can we move on?
And then, all this talk about cost of governance is too high. People are saying we should have instead of having a bicameral house, we should have a single. And who's going to make the law?
We're practicing the presidential system of government, But, there's this thing I have to talk about. We spoke about it last week, and it's still an issue. I mean, we spoke about it on Daily, just one of our chats. That particular day, I took a trip around. It rained heavily.
Yeah.
We're asking about the flooding. We're asking, what states should do about the flooding situation and everything. I drove along Agidingbi Road That day when it rained, Agidingbi Road was flooded in Lagos. Agidingbi Road, you could literally walk from Agidingbi, right beside Lagos Television, to the governor's office. Incidentally, there was a state-backed event happening that same day, that time. And that's just one.
And that's supposed to be news. I'm just asking. Are you new in Lagos?
Should it be? Is it normal?
It's normal in Lagos.
I've
been here all my life. Every rainy season, we talk and talk and talk, and everywhere is still...
So if we're saying
you're talking about Agidingbi being flooded, please come to Lekki. Come to Ikoyi. Come to Osborne Road. Come to Dolphin.
The menu.
The menu. Even though I wanted to talk about Air Nigeria, but we don't have time for that today. We will defer it until next week, because we must talk about Nigeria Air. Curbing hunger in Nigeria. In light of this petrol price hike.
It is no longer a law matter, it's a constitutional matter.
Well, constitution, okay, the constitution says that, you know, in fact, it passed it into law in January or February this year. But if the state governments don't have the money, the local governments are not operating, who is going to make sure that we have food security?
Well, as we always say, the government has its job cut out. But hey, we're discussing already. We shouldn't be discussing.
Sorry.
The second thing we're looking at today is World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought.
We can't be talking about droughts now. It's rainy season. And then we shall turn our focus on Education Loan Fund.
That student education loan thing. And lifestyle today, we're talking about common mental health disorders and remedies. No, they're not as difficult or as you think. Actually, you probably are suffering from one of them, you just don't know.
And then, as is usual, we shall close with the Artist of the Week segment, and all I will say is that he's a he.
How do you know?
Okay.
You don't know?
Good question.
Why she's searching?
Did you hear about the Australian man who's being jailed because his daughter reported him for referring to her as a she, or referring to her as a her in the first place, because she insists that she's a boy?
So, okay, you are saying that the Artist of the Week is a...
He say, I don't know. We'll be right back to start the program in earnest in just a moment. Do stay with us and get your...
Cocoa.
Oh, cocoa ready. See you soon.
The grass is greener on the other side. That's what I thought before I took the ride. I burned my bridges so I'd never look back. But if I had known the life I was searching for was looking me right in the eye, oh. If I had known the life I was searching for was already my own.
Thank you for staying with us. Now, we're going to be talking about how to curb hunger in Nigeria. It's important to note that, just a moment, I need to read something out. Ooh.
On the same matter of curbing hunger.
Yes. This was signed by the former president himself.
March this year.
No. It's dated the 6th day of February, 2023.
Okay.
Now, this president signed it on March 3rd. And it says the bill alters the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999, to require the government to direct its policy towards ensuring right to food and food security in Nigeria. That happened earlier this year. Now, nearly 25 million of us in this country are at risk of facing hunger between June and August this year. God almighty. That is not something that one would want to think about, and that is likely to happen if urgent action is not taken, according to the October 2022 Cadre Harmonisé, a government-led and UN-supported food and nutrition analysis carried out twice a year. So, this danger is facing us now. We must do something about it, because 25 million is a lot of people. And guess what? I'm just saying the obvious. Hunger leads to death. We don't want to have 20 million people dying from hunger in our country within the next 3 months.
What's worse about that figure is that of the people who are currently food insecure, 3 million of them are in what they call the Northern Bay states. And without immediate action, the figure could increase to more than 4 million.
Oh, God. The statistics get worse. Anyway, what do we know? We have a panel to look at this with us this morning and see if we can do some quick fixes to prevent these deaths that we're talking about and to prevent people going hungry. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Gbolagade Ayola, Professor of Agricultural Economics and Policy, and he's also the President, Farm and Infrastructure Foundation. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Nigerians.
Also in our studio in Abuja, we have Saidat Shonoiki, Executive Director and Founder, Green Skills Center. Good morning.
Good morning.
A food systems development practitioner is also with us, Aziz Salau. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Right, let me start with you, Professor Ayola. These figures are kind of scary, and you are in agricultural economics and policy. First of all, what do you think about the bill that was passed earlier this year about food security in Nigeria? And what, in actual terms, what does it mean?
Thank you. Good morning again, Nigerians. Those figures, as high as they are real. That many people in Nigeria cannot sleep because of hunger. And the rest of us, also in Nigeria, cannot sleep because of the fear of the hungry. Therefore, against the background of these frightening figures, the Right to Food bill was recently signed into law by the immediate past president of Nigeria. It has a context to it, and it has a back story to it. But in essence, the aim of the law is at stemming the perennial trend of policy failures in Nigeria to make the country food secure. So many programs of government had come and gone without achieving this objective. The Operation Feed the Nation, the Green Revolution, the NALDA, the DFRI, and so on and so forth. The issue is that we need to ask why that since 1960 at independence till date, Nigeria could not boast of any point in time that can proudly say as a country it is food secure like many other countries. So we looked at that situation and observed that there are two possibilities. Technology that we are deploying is inadequate. Second, the policy environment for implementing these programs and projects is also deficient. On our own part, we see that technology that had worked elsewhere can also work in Nigeria. So we zeroed in on the policy arena, that indeed, even though technology matters a lot for agriculture to thrive in this country, policy matters even the more. Therefore, we need a scheme, a framework law that needs to make failure of agricultural policies in this country practically consequential. Consequential upon government as owners of these policies, and also consequential upon the private sector and other people in that sector. If there is no consequence, everybody, including government, will be doing what is right in their own eyes. Therefore, this law was initiated at my own organization back in 2010, when we entered the National Assembly, that we need a law that makes food a right of all Nigerians, so that it will be inalienable, it will be consequential, it will be actionable by anybody whose right is violated, and justiciable in our law, and eventually remediable where necessary. So that was the background thought behind the bill that went into National Assembly in 2010. And we had a consortium of organizations of like-minded people who feel that something needed to be done. My own organization is Farm and Infrastructure Foundation. We have other members of the consortium we call Voices for Food Security, HEDA, NANS, and a coalition of All Farmers Association of Nigeria and the FACAN and such other organizations who came together over these years. Over 13 years, we were battling in the National Assembly for this bill to see the light of day. So we were happy that in 2022, last year, in March, the National Assembly passed it, and because it's a constitutional amendment bill, it needed to go to the 36 states for their concurrence. And by December 2022, last year, 27 states, instead of the 24 states that we needed, constituting the 2/3 of the states, we got 27 states already by December 2022 that passed it. And therefore, National Assembly took effort to persuade Mr. President to sign it into law. And in March of this year, President Buhari signed it into law as the last on the list of 16 constitutional amendment bills that he signed in the penultimate period of his exit as president.
Quite the background for a number of people who had no idea that such a thing was being done. You know, sometimes a good number of things are being done for people without them even knowing about it. So thank you for all the effort that you have made. But let me ask Mrs. Shonaiki this next question. One of the things that, one of the plans, previous plans of several governments that Professor Ayola mentioned earlier, concerns was DFRI. He mentioned Operation Feed the Nation, he mentioned DFRI, he mentioned a number of others. There are others, there's the Green Revolution. In fact, there are those who came before the Obasanjo government of the 70s. The question that I'd like to ask you, particularly in the light of that constitutional amendment that is now operational because of the signature of the president, do you see us having the capacity to deliver this promise, this demand of the Constitution to the people? I'm not talking about what the governors or the various state governments can do or should do yet. I'm talking about the capacity to produce food for the people. Now we're about 200 and something million we're here. Do you think we have the capacity to deliver on that promise to our people?
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I believe we have strongly the capacity to produce the food. In one of my research studies, we tried to look at the arable land available for Nigeria, and even in the world, sub-Saharan, the land that will remain for food, they are mostly in the sub-Saharan region. And Nigeria is one of those area. When I travel across the states, I see a lot of abundant land lying fallow. And we also have the labor to be able to do this work. It's just in terms of enabling environment that we still need to look at. And I think most of the policy that the Prof have mentioned here, and failures of most of them. And when I was doing this study, we found out that most of this policy, most of them are not inclusive in terms of, sense of belonging from the relevant stakeholders to be able to take ownership of this initiative. For example, in Nigeria, for the woman force, the labor force that produce food for us is 70% from small-scale agriculture. And when we are deploying solutions for productivity in agriculture, are this solution adaptive for small-scale older farmers to use? That's one question. Are they affordable? And most of the policy too, in terms of policy formulation, when they are being monitored, when they are to check if this project they are being carried out in what they have mentioned, are they also inclusive? So when we are talking about policy, it has to be inclusive. And I believe strongly that if we work on localized solution for our small-scale older farmers, the solution you give to people in Adamawa should be what is suitable for them. The solution we give to Ogun State should be what is going to be suitable for them. And we also need to ride on our comparative advantage. In some area of in the state, they have what they are good at. For example, in Ogun State, in the Southwest, they are very good in livestock. There are some crops that are very good. We have to ride on those comparative advantage. And what are the policy, what are the solutions we are going to provide for them to make it easy for them? And another thing I want to mention here is that research to development, we need to also look into that. While I was in UK, I learned something about farmer-led research. This is a kind of, you don't just go into research without knowing, okay, what do the farmers need? And right from inception, they will adopt it, they will look into it, and it will become scalable. So we also need to make our research work for us. So I believe if we can localize the solution we are providing for small-scale order, our policy should be inclusive in terms of formulation and in terms of evaluation, and research to development is
Madam,
institutionalized.
it sounds to me like, pardon me for butting it, it sounds to me like you're describing the things that we need to do, and that's fine. But when I asked the question about whether or not we have capacity, it sounds also to me like you are grading the capacity or classifying the capacities that we need. So in terms of food production, we have the capacity because we know the people who can get these things done. We have them all over the place. But then you're also mentioning some capacities that we have, but we are not scaling up yet. We're not even scaling at all. You talked about research just now. And then there are those who have questioned our capacity or a lack of it to do value-added or value-adding agriculture. We still export cocoa. We still export crude oil. We still export some of these things that we can actually add value to in this country. But for now, we are taking them out. It's that in that space that I'm asking the question whether or not we have the capacity. If we do have the capacity, what has stopped us until now?
Okay, there's something they call quality infrastructure. I'm a member of that. And you will see, if you want to export maybe catfish to UK, you can't export it directly. You need to go through Ghana. There's what we call quality infrastructure in terms of certification. These are one of the reasons that is not allowing us to scale up. And that's why we have the capacity. And I think also in the area of profiling too, there are some people that are better off at the primary production level, and there are some people at the secondary production level. So these are the reasons that I'll say that we have the capacity. So there are some things that is not making us to achieve that productivity level. We need to profile our food and the food that we will eat and the food that we need to export. So quality infrastructure is another thing that will make us to be able to, our value-added product to be able to be exportable. Then in terms of the food that a family will need to eat, there's need for us to also have a policy around that. There's this UN decade of family farming that Nigeria, I don't think they also sign into that. Is a way that the food that the family need to eat, in terms of the family labor, they can produce it, like the common vegetable, common maize, cassava staple crops. So there should be also policy around the staple food that we need to eat on a daily basis. And there also should be a policy around the food that is tradable outside the country. So in terms of capacity, we have everything, but I'm still talking about the enabling environment for all this profile of food level, the one that we need to eat on a daily basis and the one that we need to export, like the quality infrastructure. Okay. We are not yet there in terms of quality infrastructure to be able to export our food outside the country.
Okay.
So I know they have been on that for like years now, and we still don't have the national laboratory to be able to make our food exportable outside the country.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Shonoike. Mr. Salau, Ayo asked about the capacity to produce. Let's talk about the capacity to purchase.
We can't hear.
Oh, it looks like Mr. Salau cannot hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Great.
I can hear you now.
I said, Ayo asked Mrs. Shonoike about the capacity to produce. I'm asking you about the capacity to purchase. Even when the food is available, how many of us can afford it with the astronomical inflation figures that we have? 4 tomatoes are going for 200, 300 naira. Gari went from 500 naira for a paint container to, I think it's about 2,000, 2,500 now. So even though we are able to produce the food, how many of these 25 million people we're talking about can actually afford to buy them?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think you've actually stated it. The issue of inflation is actually very, very devastating, especially in this period. And when we talk about all these challenges, the effect is mostly felt at the rural community. And when we talk about production in Nigeria, most of the productions or most of the foods that even comes from the farm to the market, they all come from these rural farmers, and they're the one having challenges. And now it has now gotten to a stage that whether you are in the rural community or you are living in the city, the inflation is actually there to affect everybody. And the factors around this includes the issue of different conflicts that are affecting different farming communities. Because the issue of conflicts and security is actually very, very big, and it affects what we're actually, consuming. The production is there, but when it comes to consumption, there is need for us to embrace the reality. And the reality is that issues around common vegetables and fruits that we are looking at are consuming healthy fruits for that matter that we are looking at consuming in our various households. There's need for us to start practicing what we call backyard farming. Because whether we like it or not, the inflation would now we have the issue of naira, dancing around in the I and E market. So that would continue to be. The only solution is for us to see how we can embrace this thing holistically. Because whether we like it or not, anybody can actually not do without food. We can't do without all these vegetables, all these tomatoes, and all these consumables in our household. So there is need for everyone to actually be serious about what we are actually trying to do. And as a result of that, a lot of adulterated seeds are now in the market. A lot of foods are that are pesticide affecting our health. So if you know that if we say we are actually really serious about this issue of consumption, there is need for us to embrace it ourselves. We have certified seeds. We have seeds that we can easily propagate, even without use of sand or soil. So there's need for us to practice backyard farming, control what we are eating, and continue to eat healthy. Then the government can actually also help us in terms of an enabling environment. There's need for us to implement a lot of this policy. The policies of assault should stop. The ones we have, let us make sure we have a monitoring and evaluation, to make sure that all these things are actually, going in place. And there is need for us to also be accountable. And accountability is not for maybe the government alone. It also affects people. So there's need, and also there is need for us to, participate actively in all these policy discussions, especially when it comes to food. Because when we talk about food, food is culture. It is what actually brings everybody together. Look at last month, Ida was all over the internet talking about food, on the hackathon. So there's need for us to embrace backyard farming, because whether we like it or not, we need to. The Operation Feed the Nation did not work, but now we are promoting Operation Feed Yourself. So there's need for us to embrace these little practices that would help us, encourage people to actually, start consuming what they eat. And with that, the issue of consumption, we are able to curb it, because whether we like it or not, it will continue to be like that, except we take a holistic approach. And whether we like it or not, it's a collective responsibility. We would not say things are happening and we are not actually going to eat. So there is need for us to embrace the backyard farming. There is need for us to see how we can have these healthy diets, healthy foods to ourselves, because it is consumption. And when we talk about consumption, we are discussing about hunger now. But then a lot of things can be done to ameliorate this issue of hunger. Whether we like it or not, even if you are staying in an estate, you don't even need soil. What you just need are mediums to make sure that you're actually propagating small vegetables you can actually need to consume with your family and immediate environment. Earlier this week, we were still in Oyo State, engaging the students to see how they can also, embrace this issue of school garden activities. And the idea is simply just that we are making them understand to see the reality of even where their food is actually coming from. And from there, they pick it up, they see how it's been done, they take the seeds and take it to their family or to their households to practicalize what they've seen in their schools. And from there, everybody gets to know really what is really happening. Yeah. We really don't have to wait for the government when it comes to consumption. We need to start consuming, especially the little ones we can actually do when it comes to vegetable and fruits. We should start consuming, propagating it in our various environments. And with this, everybody would really be healthy, and it would really reduce a lot of issues around health and food security. Thank you.
Now, Professor, do help us solve this conundrum. We're talking about hunger. And I suppose among the reasons why there will be hunger is that there isn't enough food. And yet, Mrs. Shonoike was talking about exporting food. So we don't have enough to eat, but we're exporting. Can you help us solve that?
Thank you very much. Our viewpoint is that agricultural development could be separated into two planks. One, and the more important, is food security. The second is agribusiness. It is in the regime of agribusiness that we talk of a market for food. Otherwise, naturally, food security, as the name sounds, is a social commodity. And first and foremost, all policies should focus food security as such that the set of policies that will enhance the business part of it, that is agribusiness, will be different from the set of policies that will promote food security. Our several endeavors to make this nation food secure, which we have not realized, is found in all the bits and pieces of the issues that you have raised this morning. Issues of capacity, human capacity, natural capacity, natural resources. How much of land is there? Plenty. So the capacity is there. The market is predetermined. What else could be the reason for Nigeria not to have hit this target for so long? It is what my colleagues here have referred to variously as holistic approach or enabling environment. All amounts to the policy sector of agricultural development. And that is why this particular act is serious. Year in, year out, government does its best. It does what is good in its own eyes to intervene in the market for food security. But the effort does not show, it does not amount to success because the policy environment is unstable, is unsustainable, and is not working simply because of what I can call policy impunity, whereby the policy actors themselves are the primary factors pushing for them not to work. So we want to remove that situation of impunity by this law. We want to make government accountable in terms of its policies, policy accountability. We also desire to have policy transparency, policy responsibility, that when government declares a statement of policy, it follows through to the logical conclusion. Those are the things that are missing, why the food environment appears deficient. If the policy environment is fixed, as we intend to do under this law, all other things will fall in place. The farmers who devote their energy to producing on land that is abundant capacity will be able to succeed and generate incremental food production that will make us food secure. So food security is primary. It's the first thing before we begin to talk of export. nations that have succeeded didn't start from export.
There was
looking
pardon me, Prof.
export.
If you can hear me, my apologies. You know, you were talking about, you know, the inconsistency of policy and the rest of them the other time. This one is a lot stronger. This is not just a policy. It's not just a program. It's not just a law. It is the Constitution. This particular, you know, recommendation is embedded in the Constitution now, the same way the same Constitution makes it mandatory for governments to provide education for people as and when capable. So there is some kind of condition, as in this case as well, there's some kind of condition that the Constitution presumes that it's whenever, as soon as it is or as much as it is practicable, it should be done. But then education, we know where we are in terms of education, that provision of the Constitution being adhered to. So allow me to take you back to that. What's the assurance we have this time around that it's not just going to go in the way of the same provisions made for education, same way the Child Rights Act is a law in the Constitution in Nigeria, not in the maybe not in the Constitution, but it is a law in Nigeria, has not been domesticated in a number of states. What's the assurance we have this time around that all the things that we're talking about here now, what's the infrastructure, what's the system built to ensure that this time around, because it is as serious as a constitutional matter, something will be done about it decisively and sustainably?
Thank you very much. The viewpoint of this law is that we must hold government accountable. What is missing in all the provisions of the Constitution that have not been complied with, provision for education, provision for other good things of life. The missing link is that government does not account to anybody in the event of failure of these provisions to hold. In the event of policy failure in several directions, who asks government question? Who takes him up? How does the generality of the people whose lives are affected, how do they demand policy responsibility from government? This law is embedded inside it the avenue to make government accountable in such a way that if accountability is not provided, it's consequential upon government. We are presently working on the framework for its implementation. All serious dimensions of the law cannot be inside the provisions as it were in the Constitution. But we have to put up an implementation framework, including implementing regulations, which will spell out the consequence for government when it fails to deliver the food entitlements of the people. If the same thing goes in the arena of education and other arenas where Constitution says government should do this and they are failing to do it, if it continues to be without consequence, that is how it will be forever. But in this Right to Food Act, we are going to ensure that both government sector, private sector, and their agents are responsibility bound to account for the outcomes of their food policies. And when policies fail to deliver, there are certain things, I don't want to go into what those things could be. There are certain things that will constitute the consequences on that private sector, on the public sector. For example, if you pass the Third Mainland Bridge and you perceive the stench on that bridge just due to industrial effluents entering the creeks of the Atlantic Ocean, and all the fishes that have been killed, all the human lives that have been affected, without question for ages, if there is no basis for accountability, for consequences, for justiciability, for remedies, and so on, when a private sector does that, all those industries in Lagos, and they are put on notice and they refuse to stop pouring effluents into the water bodies for fishes to die, then we evoke the law for the consequences that will befall them. It had happened in many countries. Even when drought happens, when flood happens, and development partners will gather money and assist Nigeria to deliver certain succor to them, and it will not reach them. Rather, it will leak through permanent channels of robbery, of fraud, and so on and so forth. And nothing happens in the end. That is the problem. We as an organization, we are battle ready to take on any industry that its actions constitute inimical consequences to people's right to food, and demand remedy from them. Maybe when we begin to do this, they will sit up and begin to obey the laws of the land, both government and the people. So these are the mechanisms by which differences will be introduced between what is happening now in other aspects of the economy and what will begin to happen in the aspects of food from this point on.
Okay, let me ask you an ostensibly stupid question. What are the causes of hunger? It's not just that you don't have food to eat. What has led to you not having food to eat or not having nutritious food to eat?
Yes.
Mrs. Shonoiki, please. Mrs. Shonoiki.
First and foremost is availability of the
Professor,
food.
my question is for Mrs. Shonoiki.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, madam. I withdraw.
Okay. Okay. What causes hunger? Okay, this one, availability, as Prof always says. You know, food security has like 4 parts. Availability, you want to eat the food. The food that you want, you can't find it around. So that means even if you have the money, you don't have it, that's an hunger because you can't find something to satisfy you. It's not there. 2 is the access, as in, it's not within your reach. You can't say it. And also, are they nutritious? So, and the purchasing power of people to be able to buy what they want to eat. If you are earning like 30,000 in a month, and the percentage of what takes that money, maybe you are spending on transportation, you are spending on rent and all that area, and you have little left for you to buy the food that you need to survive. So this can cause your purchasing power is also an issue. So these are the things, your purchasing power, the availability that you can't have access to that food. I can say purchasing power is the most critical part of the aspect when we talk about people that live in the urban area. But for people that live in the rural area and they have access to land, I may not say they cannot produce their own food because they have access to land. So what makes them to be hungry? Maybe they want to send their children to school, the cost of education, the cost of health, the cost of clothing. So all those things have taken much of what they need to buy the food, even though they are planting the staple food, but there are some other ones that we are going to buy. So these are the issues. So we need to work on our purchasing power, and we also need to work on the availability, the one that they will eat to keep them alive on a daily basis. So that's what, in my own opinion, purchasing power is very, very key in order for them not to go hungry, and available fund with them.
Mr. Salau, how much do you think that climate change and conflict are contributing to the presence of so much hunger. You know, most of there's a list that the UN has put out, the hungriest nations in the world, 10 hungriest nations in the world, and of the 10, 9 are in Africa. And in most of those areas, most of them are areas where there's conflict. So how much do you think that conflict and climate change and gender discrimination, how much are those things contributing to what we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you so much. So when we talk about the issue of climate change and actually conflicts, they are actually two different things. But as we speak now, the issue of climate change is actually a very, very serious one for those that actually know. Because when we talk about climate change, we've gone to different communities and we tell them this and that about climate change, and you know, most of them still feels that, oh, maybe the lack of rain when it's supposed to come and it's not coming, it's probably because of you know, maybe their offense to God. So God is actually maybe trying to, you know, punish them, and that is why they don't actually have rain to propagate and, you know, consume healthy foods. So the issue of climate change is actually very, very serious. We've been going from one conference to the other talking about the issues around climate change. And when it comes to Nigeria context, it is very, very serious. Climate change is very, very devastating. It affects everything. The thing about climate change is that it doesn't only affect farmers, it affects everybody. Because, for example, the NIMET helps us to, you know, come up with the yearly seasonal climate predictions. And what we do is to see how we can actually pass those climate informations, you know, step it down to various communities for them to know, or when the rain is actually going to start, when there will be cessation, when the rain will go. And all these things are actually not the same across the country. So the issue of climate change, especially in the rural communities, is really, really much, because most of them actually, so the main challenge is that most of them, when they see the first rain, they feel that, oh, the rainy season is here. And without, you know, information, they don't have their capacity are not built around this weather and climate information services. They really don't know how to go about it. What they know is that once they see the rain, they'll go to their farm and, you know, propagate. And after 2 weeks, they see that there's actually a dry spell, and they will now understand that, oh, maybe the rain is just a flash. And as a result of that, they lose a lot of their inputs, and they have to, you know, do it again. So the issue of climate change and conflict is actually very, very critical. When we talk about the issue of conflict, we know what is actually happening, not only in the Northeast. Before, we used to say, oh, Northeast.
Mr. Salawu, I beg your pardon.
Northeast is happening.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Salawu. We need to manage our time. We have to start winding down now. And in closing, I'd like to ask you, as briefly as you can, in 1 minute, if possible, what kind of solutions should we begin to look at to prevent the imminent hunger that they say is coming between now and October? Can you proffer?
Right. Thank you so much. I think the first thing is education and awareness. There is need for us to equip ourselves, build our capacity, especially in the rural areas. There's need for us to educate and make a lot of awareness about nutritious food. Consuming food is not only enough for now. We need to consume nutritious food. There's also a need for us to make sure that there's active participation of every stakeholders across the agricultural value chain. So whether you're a banker or anything you do, we eat food. So there's need for us to start promoting, you know, consumption of nutritious foods, and also there's need for government to actually make sure that the policies are actually, there's enabling an environment for people to actually, you know, participate actively, and also for some form of empowerment, and also contribution to mitigate the issue of hunger, and also contribute to the food systems and transformation we are all clamoring for in Nigeria. Thank you.
Mrs. Shonoike.
Yeah.
Your suggestions for a solution, as quickly as you can, 1 minute.
Okay. Okay, so what I would advise is that there's need to put in what we call climate smart agriculture into right from the from the family level to the industrial level. In terms of family gardening, we have to enlighten people on how they can grow staple crops within their backyard. So we need to encourage that. Then we need to look into how the staple crop, that the major one, the cassava, the rice and everything, on how we want to produce it in large quantity, and farmers can buy off from them so that we can store in our silos. So those are the things I think we can really do, and a lot of awareness that so that people can know what they need to do, maybe to stock up, so that when it odds, it will not be so devastating. So climate smart agriculture and localized solution.
Professor Ayola.
So that's what I will say for now.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
We need massive effort of government behind farmer support. And that is in terms of inputs into production, fertilizer, seed, and pesticides. Also behind financing agriculture, particularly financial credit facilities for farmers to be able to perform well during the season. We need to organize our market and all that. But above all, government needs to gear up to serious implementation of the new Right to Food Act so that it can become accountable to the people about agricultural policies in this country and can be transparent and follow due process in order to mobilize people to demand good policies from their governments at national, state, and local levels.
Gbolagade Ayola, Professor of Agricultural Economics and Policy, President, Farm and Infrastructure Foundation, and Chairman, Voices for Food Security, and he's also a member and committee chair, Nigeria Zero Hunger Forum. Thank you very much for coming on Sunrise. Our thanks also go to Mrs. Saidat Shonoiki, Executive Director and Founder, Green Skills Center, as well as Mr. Aziz Salau, Food Systems Development Practitioner. Thank you all very much for coming to share your thoughts with us this morning. And we hope that...
Thank you for the opportunity.
We hope that those who should be listening are listening to you, because we don't want 25 million people going hungry between now and October. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
May God forbid.
Sunrise will return in just a moment. Do stay with us.
Thank you for staying with us. Now, droughts are among the greatest threats to sustainable development, especially in developing countries such as ours.
And it contributes to hunger as well.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. I mean, you spoke about it the other time when I mentioned drought. You said, hey, rainy season is here. There can't be drought. But, you know, I guess it's one of those things we'll take on with our guests. So forecasts estimate that by 2050, droughts may affect over 3/4 of the world's population. The number and duration of drought has increased by 29% since 2000. That's year 2000, as compared to the previous decades. When more than 2.3 billion people already face water stress, is a huge problem. It is impacting more than 70 million Nigerians and 75 hectares of land.
75 million?
Yeah. Women hold a vital stake in the health of the land, yet they don't often have control over it. Yes. Let's have this focus on World Day to Combat Desertification and Drought with Joseph Onoja, who is DG, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. He joins us along with Tabi Joda, who is a consultant climate, gender and security in the Sahel, United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, as well as Professor Adepoju Adeshola, Chair and President of the International Coordinating Council of the Program on Man and Biosphere Reserve. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. Let me begin with you, Mr. Onoja. How much of a threat is this? One of the challenges a number of people will have when we hear these figures, maybe not, let me not ask about the threat. First of all, the awareness, the consciousness of this reality. You mentioned about 70 million Nigerians being impacted and 75 million hectares of land being impacted. So how aware are we as a people? How is there any sense of urgency that you can say, okay, Nigerians know this, and consequently, they're even concerned enough to take whatever precautionary measure they should?
Unfortunately, thank you very much for having me. I must look from the last set of speakers that talked about food security. And this topic is very, very fundamental to that topic that we're talking about, food security. And unfortunately, not many people are aware of what is happening and the threat that the desertification causes, because it doesn't affect all over Nigeria at the moment, even though if it continues the way it is going on, we are going to be faced with serious issues, because we have what we call the frontline states in Nigeria, that is about the 11 or so, 15 states in the northern part of the country that are faced with this, and the reality is really facing them, and those ones are aware. But when you go down to the middle part of the country, and the southern part of the country, not many people are aware of it. And the sad part of it is that these are areas that are agrarian, and most of our food come from this area, especially when we talk about our cereals and so on. So it is a threat to our food security, talking from the last set of guests that spoke on food security, and it's also a threat to our general well-being. But as I said, not many people are aware of it, and that is the danger. And that is why a day like this is set aside, so that we'll continue to create awareness, so that people will know that this is an imminent threat to us, to our well-being, to our security.
If you can hear me, pardon me for a second. What do you think is responsible for that poor awareness? Is it that they do not see the things that are happening, or it's too far away from their realities?
I think, as I said, the frontline states are aware of it because it's happening in their domain. But the other states, if we don't travel to those parts, then it will be as if, oh, it's a picture. When you talk about, oh, Sahara Desert, a lot of people see it in picture, except people who have the opportunity flying over to Europe, and they are flying over Sahara Desert and they are seeing it. But not everybody is aware. For instance, when you talk to somebody who is in the southern part of the country and living in a forested habitat, it will be difficult for the person who has not traveled to the north to imagine what it means that sand.
Well, I'll come back to you, Mr. Onoja. I'll come back to you because, you know, there are those who would say, hey, all of these people that you're talking about who live with these realities have representation all over the country, including in the National Assembly. Well, I'll come back to you on that one. And let me ask you, Mr. Joda, I mean, with all of the work that you've been doing in the shall I say, endangered spaces and populations of the country, what have you seen? How welcoming is any initiative to reverse this trend? And is there any role any state government you've seen playing in all of these?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and I'm grateful to add my voice to this global conversation on this day of desertification and drought. And it's amazing that the earlier speaker was citing something around knowledge. And let me intervene a little bit to that before I move to the issue of best practices like you are asking. You don't need to be aware of desertification to feel the effect of desertification. And I want to point a finger very quickly to the gap on awareness, which is a responsibility of the policy stratum of Nigeria that is often disguising the reality around the effects of desertification and drought and the parameters with which people should appreciate the extent of the threat and the challenges. So, for instance, if you see in recent times the movement of herder communities moving southward of Nigeria, the question is why? Why now? So you don't have to go to Sokoto to see desertification and drought effects live to understand that there is a threat on ground. This encroachment, further encroachment down south is a push by the existential threats of drought and desertification that is encroaching, or that has encroached holistically all the communities in these frontline states, as my brother earlier mentioned, necessitating those stakeholders who need access to this fodder or pasture fields or water, which is highly depleted by the desertification itself, they necessitate them to move down southward where there is still lush and pasture. So if we need awareness, awareness should begin from identifying or understanding the extent of the threat which we are already feeling right now around the country. So in terms of best practices, I am equally ambassador of the Great Green Wall, which is working on the expanse of the 8,000 kilometers from West Cape of Africa, from Senegal, Mauritania, right to the Horn of Africa in Djibouti and Somalia, where a whole lot of models are actually existing that are fighting back the desert. And in that, some of our work has seen the planting of over 3.7 million trees in critically endangered communities where critically endangered species actually previously thrived, but now they are undermined by the effects of this drought and desertification. And this set of models you can see around the lake chart, how it is equally transmitting into some of the social cohesion that you can now see in the lake chart, which previously did not exist 7, 8, 10 years ago, when the threat and impact of desertification and drought was really ripe. So we've been able to capture the essence of using nature-based solutions through regeneration, conservation, restoration, and holistic set of ecosystem development approaches to bring back viable pasture land, pasture fields, freshwater fish, and different ecosystem services that are necessary for thriving communities, enabling communities' livelihood, especially responding to food insecurity, responding to land degradation, responding to poverty, and even those drivers that necessitate irregular migration of people and stakeholders who need access to these resources. So we can quickly cite the example around the lake chart in these communities where social cohesion has been restored as a result of these interventions that we have had through restoring the land. And of course, it's not just the human intervention. The holistic impact includes conservation of wildlife reserves, also reviving or rehabilitation of ecosystem services that have attracted, the convergence or the reemergence of dispersers, pollinators, and other species that previously didn't thrive in those communities or that were threatened by the depletion, but now they are reconverging as a result of the comeback or the rehabilitation of these landscapes. Holistically, it's very important for us to note also that at this moment, it doesn't mean that these solutions are enough. The situation is still very rife. You can see stark land degradation impact that has undermined the livelihoods of communities, condemning any source of livelihood and putting communities at serious threat of even having the ability to access common, viable, productive land to plant a seed for it to grow around the year. And this is connected to the interplay with the weather variabilities and different onsets, and of course, the movement of either people from areas that are heavily depleted, kind of creating pressures on communities that still have some little level of viable biodiversity or ecosystem services, and then within a very short period of time, the population explosion actually also impacts that land and depletes it again.
Okay.
So there is a cycle of depletion, regeneration, restoration, conservation, and depletion again as social factors such as population growth, is also interplaying with other biophysical and geophysical impacts.
Okay. Let me bring in Professor Adeshola. Professor, the theme for this year's Day Against Desertification and Drought is Her Land, Her Rights. I'd like to ask you, what informed the choice of this theme? It all has to do with the woman. Why? Professor Adeshola.
You're muted, Prof.
Professor,
Are you hearing me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for having me. This is a quite interesting program, and that's why I had to quickly cut my trip short. I'm just arriving from an international discourse on the same issue. It's important that we bring gender issue in, and I'm happy to have my brother, Dr. Noja, there, because this is a major player in the field. I think we're moving towards the right direction now, because in the past, you just talk about reforestation, reclamation of land, and all of this, forgetting the actual participants of this work. Like the immediate speaker mentioned about our work on the Great Green Wall, because I was just the immediate past national coordinator of afforestation. When you're covering 11 states, 11 countries across the belt of Africa, and women are not brought into the issue. And we're only talking about just planting trees or just reversing deforestation and all of that. Then what are the people living in this forest going to be living with? Then we'll start thinking about their livelihood, and who are really the numerical strength in the area of these activities now? Women. But in the past, yes, men are into business of all of that, but actually we realize that women and children and youth need to be focused upon to be able to achieve what we're talking about, because when you plant the trees, you walk away. Now the women have to do their cooking, they're in the rural area, and the Enlightenment campaign had always been majorly in the urban area. The activity that's going on today, you agree with me, there's a process going on in Abuja. There are mass movement to educate people, and so also they will do in other capital states, capital of Nigerian states. But how many trees are we planting in the states or in the state capital? All of these activities actually in the rural area. And who are the people that should be enlightened in the rural area? It's these women and the youth who live with it, who are the ones really facing the drought squarely. It's easier to talk about drought in the city, but you need to go to the rural area and see what the women and the youth are passing through. So now we're thinking, let's really bring the actors into the game, because they do better than men in maintaining even what we have planted or the livelihood in the rural area. And that's why I agree with what is being done now in the Great Green Wall, because it's not only about planting trees, it's also to establish the gardening, the ornamental activities for the women in the rural area to live on while they maintain whatever we're planting. So this is what makes the gender biasness of this year theme stronger than the past, because this will actually help us to achieve a greater percentage of our implementation plans.
Professor, just a little observation. In many parts of the world, when there's a drought or when there's shortage of water, it's mainly women you see with their pots of water on their heads or with their buckets going in search of water. Does this have anything to do with why this is the theme?
that's part of the issue we have identified, not only in the rural area, almost in everything, almost even in crisis, in whatever, women are always at the receiving end. We're saying this with all concern for the women and the youth. But I think all the actors have to get back to the drawing table in all our natural and environmental activities to give women their adequate position so that at least we'll be able to do that. So it's all of those things that you have also seen that inform us looking around the gender participations in every activities of reversing deforestation, desertification, and the biodiversity loss in general. So this is what we have seen also. You see children suffering, the women are the one that has to trek several miles. You can't really appreciate the Victoria, whatever they are saying, but some of them will not only trek, they will also have to begin to dig and leave such place overnight to allow a little water to gather for them to collect the following day. But this is actually the issue of grant is staring at us. But to tell you that it should go beyond us celebrating a day to mark what they are passing through, but rather to go back to the drawing table, all the policy makers, the actors, and really let us practice what we're talking about.
Okay, Prof.
And should they end with today? Thank you.
Yeah. Let me come back to Mr. Onoja. Talking about the last issue that Prof raised, which is that of policies, going back to the drawing board and all of that. This issue isn't just happening on us, Mr. Onoja. It's always a build-up. I had reason to go to my own village from time to time, and I've been to a number of other places. And I know that these things don't just spring on us. It's always a gradual progression. How did we get here? What are the things governments, especially at the local government levels and the state government levels, should have done or were doing that they stopped doing and left undone that brought us here? Maybe that will give us pointers to doing what Prof said, not just making it a celebration for a day, but to actually do something about it progressively.
Okay, so you will permit me, because of the importance of the theme, because that's where our emphasis should lie, her land, her rights, it's good for us to really expound it a bit more before I go into where we dropped the ball. You see, to add to what Prof said, women, even scientifically, has been shown that their lands are more productive in terms of biodiversity protection than the ones that men do. A colleague of mine, Dr. Hope Seta, who did a work on farmlands and farm tenure system of men and women, found out that the lands that are managed by women actually had more biodiversity in it than that of men. And then he further found out that the yield are the same. That means if you allow women to manage lands, we'll have more biodiversity and we'll have more food. So that's it's good for us to emphasize, and that's why there's a need for us to bring back the importance of women in playing in this field. And it's very important to underscore the importance of the theme for this year. Now, talking about where we have dropped the ball, especially at the local government level, I must say that the local government, which is the closest government here to the people, we have gone moribund over the years, and with a lot of things suffering from it. Because there are some, I know in those days, there are some rural programs that used to happen, including regular reforestation of our, whether it's because of the fiscal policy or their subventions that is not getting to them or whatever it is, the political system has kind of destroyed the local government system as we have, and they are not able to carry out the responsibility they're supposed to carry out. And one of these responsibilities, because the local government is close to the people, is to ensure that our lands are fertile, our lands are protected, our lands are not as degraded as they are. as you said, is a gradual process. And if we don't tackle it at the bottom, at the base, at the root cause of the issue, then we have all of this issue becomes a national issue. Because, I mean, these things happen gradually. And then because there are no stopgaps or there are no policies on the ground, right at the grassroots level to ensure that this thing is nipped at the bud, it just springs up to us. It seems as if it springs up to us. But when you go to these local government areas and you go to these rural areas, the rate of deforestation that is going on, I know that when you deforest the place, you leave the land bare. The land is not able to revive itself. As Mr. Tabi said, when you have just a few places where a lot of resources are gathered, everybody comes there, and then because when people migrate, there's no place in vacuum. There will be conflicts because some of this resource sharing is not done evenly and is not done seamlessly and it's done all of a sudden. So there will be serious conflicts. And because it's happening at the grassroots level, it now springs up to be a national issue, and that is what is facing us now. So it goes beyond just this issue of drought and desertification. It also goes about just the policy arrangements of the Nigerian system in all, because that is where the problem is. Not an isolated thing. And that's why you will see that when something is not right, it affects every other thing. And you find out that it goes beyond just this drought we are talking about. It talks about poverty. It talks about food security. It talks about even the health system as well. I know all of these are all intertwined. So when we need to look at it in a holistic manner to be able to ensure that we have this done. And at the end of the day, the women folks and the children are the ones at the receiving end. And that's why we continue to emphasize that there's a need to have that, to get it right from the grassroots, so that we will be able to have a holistic approach, so that when the environment is healthy, then the citizenry will be healthy, because then you will talk about they will have healthy food, they will have access to healthcare, because the money they will spend on healthcare would not necessarily be there because the environment is already taking care of them.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Noja. Mr. Joda, I'd like you to share your experience along the line of what Dr. Noja has spoken about, especially in your work planting trees and trying to reforest, if I can use that word. Of course, I know there's something all of you are doing. Share your experience, especially at the local government level, in the rural areas. When you go there, what kind of engagement do you have with the women, with the children, with the young people, with the people in those communities? What are their complaints? How well do you think how aware are they of the responsibility of governments to them in this regard? You kindly unmute, please. We can't hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. It's very key. I think it's connecting to what Onoja and Prof said earlier. But let me also highlight, before I go deep into that drought and desertification are not only risk drivers, they are also risk multipliers. That's why the different interconnectedness of climate risk, social risk, even political risk and upheavals are driven by the catastrophic convergence of these, either biophysical and social impacts that are interplaying each other and creating pressures on the polity. We must be aware of that so that we don't dissociate the impact of land degradation, drought, and desertification from what is happening at the national level as violence. And there was a question that was asked earlier: how does climate change create or cause violence or conflict? This is very straight. When resources are strained, people engage in violent competition over the scarce resources. And what creates scarce resources? Nothing creates scarce resources like the depletion and erosion of biodiversity and ecosystem services, like my friend Onoja earlier said. So for engagement in communities that we have been carrying out over the last decade years and a few years, has been a lot about bringing to the mindset of the people the understanding of not just the physical restoration of landscape, but human knowledge restoration, narrative restoration, attitude and habit restoration. Because the initial cause of drought and desertification originates from reckless and unsustainable farming practices, herding or livestock or grazing practices, hunting practices, fishing practices. All this combination of factors create the degradations of the environment, keeping our soils bare and liable to the desertification and drought. So this has been some of the biggest engagements that we have with women, with youths, with pastoralists, with farmers, with herders, and different stakeholders that use natural resources as their means of well-being, food, and economic activities. So this has been the core of the different engagements that we are having so that people understand that we are not planting just trees physically, but we are growing trees at the same time growing hope. Because where hope is lost, dignity stops existing. And when dignity is lost, people lose nothing even when they can, when they can prey on each other. So our job has been to engage people, create these viable ecosystems, services development, management through connecting value chains from the existing resources and those that we restore. So when we plant trees, we create the relationship between these trees and the people, how you manage the trees, how you intersect the trees, how you create biodiversity where you can attract back pollinators like bees, like bats. You can attract dispersers like other wildlife, bats and things that are necessary for the thriving of these trees that we plant. Because trees don't grow in isolation. They grow also in a symbiotic relationship with other natural factors like what I've mentioned earlier. So it needs awareness raising, it needs capacity building on the knowledges that people need on how to maintain, on how to conserve these landscapes that have been restored. And it also needs capacity on how people can resource these natural resources, not by cutting the trees to make charcoal, but by how they can conserve and protect these trees so that the fruits of these trees, the roots of these trees, the nuts and the oils and the leaves that can be converted into food that helps their food security, that can be converted into medicine that helps them stay healthy, that can be converted into different economic opportunities or economic resources that they can sell and to be able to have money in their pockets instead of cutting them down for short-term gains like charcoal or wood fuel, immediately. So there's an interconnection of these, and that is how we've been able to connect these communities from Senegal, from Mauritania, from Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, northern Nigeria, in the Lake Chad area, most especially in the Sahel part of Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Djibouti, Somalia, in connecting the dots around this holistic knowledge that they need. Because planting trees and leaving it for people doesn't mean anything. They need the knowledge on how to care for these trees.
Okay.
And they also need the knowledge on how to understand that these trees are a part and parcel of their livelihood.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Joda. Let me ask you, Prof. Mr. Joda has spoken about the international connections. We all know that these things that we're talking about, desertification and drought, is not limited to one state or the other. And since you have also said that there is a nexus between the rural areas and the urban Nigeria, it then presupposes that there is that germane need for states and local governments to collaborate. Even the federal governments to have some kind of partnership with the states and the local governments to ensure that we still have our nation the way it ought to be. what kind, Prof, of collaboration would you be recommending, and how would you suggest it be approached at the various levels of government in Nigeria?
Thank you. Once again, I must commend channels for helping the stakeholders to achieve this. Sincerely, I'm excited that you're playing this role for the country. Some of us who have been in this job for close to 3 decades were in pain. And like Dr. Noja said, in the last 8-10 years, we have tried to engage the state governments to let them see why this is important. There are so many activities that we undertook alongside the NCF. There's a serious disconnect, and we must not shy away from that. And irrespective of how important we think this assignment is, and until the stakeholders, probably led by the federal government, with some agreement or understanding, I don't want to say law now or enforcement. Since the time we had the Land Use Act, that was the beginning of the country. That was the beginning of the problem. The state has absolute control over their land. The federal becomes more or less the policy maker. And when you are making policy that you cannot enforce, then it's also amounts to waste of resources. And when you talk about the local government, I'm sorry to say, what power does any local government has? If the resources of a local government has to pass through the state government, and the state government will decide what the money is used for. And you go to local government, which was originally where every activities always commenced in the past. And we need to also evolve the way things are done in the world. If you go to Europe, you can buy charcoal even in the supermarket, in the mall. So doing charcoal business really is not an issue. It's to get the policy right. If somebody is into charcoal business, where is his plantation that he planted, that is collecting his resources from? I give you an example. We call it tree Tectona grandis. That's thick. It takes about 10 years to mature. Now, if somebody is going to charcoal business and is approved by government, and that person is doing 1 hectare per year, and such a person planted about 20 hectares or maximum 11 hectares, that means every year, if you take out 1 hectare, 10 hectares is still standing. Beyond this business is contributing to climate change gain, and it's also will be assisting the rural area where I planted on socioeconomic activities. You also have to be supporting that local government with some corporate social responsibility.
Well, it's quite my apologies. It sounds to me like a lot of work, needs to be done. That
exactly.
We haven't even.
Exactly.
It sounds like we haven't even scratched the surface at all. I mean,
at all.
But that's one of the reasons we have the Dr. Onojas of Nigeria to ensure that we keep on the ball, and he's been doing a yeoman's job at that. But right now we're at a time we have to wrap up this conversation at this particular point. But you can be sure, Prof, that. Dr. Onoja is not going to let us rest. He will ensure that we stay on the issues. We have to thank you very much all for being here this morning. Professor Adepoju Adeshola is Chair and President of the International Coordinating Council of the Program on Man and Biosphere Reserve, as well as Tabi Joda, who is a consultant, climate, gender and security in the Sahel, United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, as well as Dr. Joseph Onoja, Director General, Nigerian Conservation Foundation. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen, and for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Something else we have been thinking about doing for years. Now we're talking about it again. That's what's up next. Stay with us.
Thank you for staying with us.
That's very educational, actually.
Excuse me?
Don't look at me like that. It's very educational. VR, virtual reality. You know, just wear that and then you can go anywhere in the world. What?
I guess he will use his own education fund to buy that headset, so he can go anywhere in the world.
Especially now
in
that
his bedroom.
You can take a loan as a student loan. You can get the loan and.
If your parents don't earn as much as 500,000 a year, yes.
My parents are dead. That's just it.
Well, if you want to go to school now, sorry.
I am going to school.
The Access to Higher Education Act 2023, which the president signed into law on Monday, otherwise known as the Students' Loan Act, establishes an education loan fund to help Nigerians fund their higher education while they pay in installments 2 years after completing their participation in the National Youth Service Corps.
In other words, by that time, they should have a job.
Yeah, in their dreams. Yes. To look at this whole bill with us this morning, this whole education fund thing with us this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Omolade Adumbi. Adumbi?
Yeah.
Adumbi, Professor of Anthropology and Law. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. All kinds of questions have been asked since this thing was signed on Monday. And my first question is, okay, this loan is now available. Thank you, Lord, because many Nigerians don't go to school because their parents cannot afford to pay school fees
but active
for them.
From September.
But it says that they should pay back within 2 years of completing their NYSC. 2, 3, 4, 5 years on, they're still looking for jobs.
Yeah, thank you very much again for having me here. And I would like to start by saying that, it's a step in the right direction that finally there is a Students' Loan Act promulgated by the National Assembly and signed into law by the new president. Mm-hmm. It's been long in coming, and I'm glad that it's finally here. Mm-hmm. But as it is with every new policy, when a new policy or a new law is enacted, then implementation becomes an issue. So the question we ought to be asking now is, what are the plans being put in place for implementation? So now we know what is in the Act, but how is it going to be implemented? And I think it is when we know how it is going to be implemented that we can begin to comment, authoritatively on it. But,
as they say, Professor, the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
The law makes a number of, since you said it hasn't been implemented, the law makes a number of assumptions. Yeah. One, they start paying back from 2 years after NYSC. 2, there are certain prerequisites to get the loan. 3, the law assumes that they have a job 2 years after graduation. So let's speak on that for a bit. The law assumes that 2 years after NYSC, because it's after 1 year after NYSC, it's after NYSC that they have a 1-year youth service program.
Yeah.
After that 1 year, they have 2 years moratorium, after which they start paying back the loan. Given the number of people that graduate each year in the country, given the rate of unemployment all across the Federal Republic of Nigeria, what are your own realities? Not assumptions now.
Excuse me. I'll start with your assumptions, not my own reality. And the reason is that...
When I say your reality, I mean what are the realities that are confronting us in the face?
Some of the realities confronting us in the face right now, just like you mentioned, is the high rate of unemployment. But I'm going to assume that part of the new administration's calculation is that some of the economic policies that they are going to implement will lead to job creation. And if jobs were to be created, that will drastically reduce the unemployment rate in the country. So which means that every graduate should at least be able to secure a job after 2 years. And I think, 3 years post-graduation to begin to pay back a loan is a good deal for any student. Even in the United States, you only have 6 months to begin to pay back if you obtain a loan to go to college.
But then there is a good social welfare system.
Well, people say there is a good social welfare system, but it depends on who you ask, and it also depends on who is in power. Even the so-called social welfare system, like unemployment benefits, it's not an unlimited unemployment benefits that people get. There is a cap. So sometimes it varies from state to state. There are some states that will say, well, the cap is just a few weeks. So if you're not able to secure employment after a few weeks, then the cap ends for you. So which means you'll no longer be entitled to that unemployment benefit. But back to the student loans thing, the reason why I said it's a good deal is that, 3 years post-graduation, you should be able to secure a job. If the economic policies that is going to be rolled out, I am assuming, will work. Then the second point to be made, just like I said initially, that with every law, there is the implementation or enforcement part of it. So then the next question becomes, what if a student is not able to secure employment after 3 years post-graduation? Will such a student be forced to pay back the loan?
How?
But of course, the question, absolutely. How is a student going to be forced to pay back? So which again brings back to the table that when it comes to implementation, there might be some level of flexibility. There might be a deferment period that, for example, if you are able to demonstrate to the board that is going to be set up to implement this, that you are yet to secure employment. So you might be able to defer for maybe a few more months or just a year.
Let me probe something here, Prof. So, is there a need to, in your opinion, rework our academic syllabuses or programs or content in such a way that the students can actually have a standalone business before these 3 years we're talking about? Here's what I'm asking. There are those who believe that as it is today, as it stands today, the academic curriculum that are used in school are largely obsolete. And consequently, may not even be able to handle the needs of today, much less the new needs of tomorrow. Second leg to that is that the NYSC program itself has embedded in it an entrepreneurship program that within that 1 year, in fact, I think it's one of the reasons that they go to what they call CD every week. So there is, I think in the first week, there's some kind of background to having some kind of entrepreneurship training. So it is assumed that after that first year, you should be able to do a little bit of business. Now, speak to us about the possibility of that helping the students. I'm not talking about, we'll come to the will of the students themselves later, but speak to us about the quality of education that can empower the students and the capacity of the youth program to create some kind of entrepreneurship mindset for them.
taken the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, two things. Yeah, but thank you for that. You know, quality of education is highly dependent on how education is funded. So we've seen over the years, particularly starting with the era of a military regime in this country, how education has become, you know, has moved from being the front burner of society to the last, to the last. And the reason is that first, when the military were in power, they saw education as a threat to their remaining in power. So they did not fund education. That unfortunately, the civilian administration that took over from them in 1999, rather than focus on revamping reforming our educational system, decided to follow the footsteps of the military by concentrating, for example, on licensing more private universities instead of funding public universities. So the
president was an ex-soldier.
Yeah, absolutely. He was an ex-soldier. Obasanjo was an ex-soldier. Then the interregnum in between Obasanjo and Buhari didn't produce the quality leadership that we expected from them. But at the same time, what I expect the current administration to do is to rethink our educational system. Is it serving Nigeria the way it should? And if it is not, what needs to be done to revamp and reform it? Then coming to the question of entrepreneur, you know, it's something that I've been asked several times. And my answer is usually that, well, training students to become entrepreneurs is good. But at the same time, the question is, if everyone becomes an entrepreneur, who buys from who? So we'll be missing the point of university education or higher education if we think everything should revolve around entrepreneurship. So, of course, this is taking a page from what is going on globally. There are some universities in the global north, for example, that will have entrepreneurship embedded in their university education. But the kind of embeddedness that is involved here is not training everyone to become buyers and sellers of a product. It is rethinking your own discipline and seeing what kind of entrepreneurship that your discipline can produce to make society better.
Could it make them intrapreneurs then, so that they are more actively productive in the organizations where they work? Because it has been said by a number of officials of the previous government that the university system wasn't producing employable young people. So if, I mean, it's given. I mean, you said we can't all be entrepreneurs. Fine. But how about making them intrapreneurs, to think like the business owners, so that the aggregate of work they will produce will actually help the organization to grow and employ more people?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think, you know, to say that, you know, the previous administration, for them to have said that our university systems are not producing employable graduates is, you know, it's a slap on the face of our university administrators. And I sympathize with our university administrators
Isn't it an indictment on the government themselves?
Absolutely. Actually, I should take that back. I was going to say it's a slap on the face of the government, because the government refuses to fund our educational system. And they put the blame on the administrators and the lecturers, who are, you know, barely making ends meet to train the next generation of leaders in this country. But here is the thing. You know, for university education, this is why I said we need to revamp and reform the educational system. So the problem with our educational system right now is that there is a disconnect between industry and the educational system. And that is why we are not producing employable graduates, because of that disconnect. And what I mean by that is that ordinarily, universities should serve as a research engine for society. Whether it is in the area of pharmaceuticals, whether it is in the area of manufacturing, they should serve as engine, as vehicle to connecting with industries in ways that will make our industries to be proficient in what they produce.
Okay.
But that is completely absent now. And that is because our government doesn't fund research in universities. Research that can be valuable to industries outside of the universities. And when you see that disconnect, it makes our graduates unemployable because they are not being trained for those industries that exist in our country.
And Professor, over time, it has become everybody wants to go to the university. Whereas the university is not where you all go to get the knowledge that you require to live a successful life. We have made away with our technical schools. We have made away with our colleges of technology. And besides, we have reduced the quality of, I don't know if I should say learning, or the qualification that the students acquire from these other colleges, which should not be. Or what do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with you 100% on that. And that is part of the problem with our educational system, the aspiration to go to universities. And I agree with you that everyone do not have to go to universities.
Exactly.
The reason why everyone wants to go to university right now is because everyone sees that as an attainment of success, or that for you to have social mobility in society, you have to go through a university education. But if there are other options of attaining social mobility in society, such as community colleges or technical colleges that can help you to achieve success in life, many people will choose that option. So what I advocate for example, in reforming our educational system is to go back to the drawing board, look at what works, particularly in the 50s and 60s. During, for example, when there was, during the administration of people like Chief Obafemi Awolowo in the Western region. So the idea was for us to produce those who can get into some of the industrial estates and be engineers. And engineers in the sense of not university-trained engineers, but technical colleges-trained engineers.
Hands-on.
Hands-on engineers. And, you know, to improve on that, in the 70s and 80s, then there was the idea of having national diplomas. That is, if you don't want to end your education at the level of technical colleges, then you could have the opportunity to go to polytechnics. But now I see a lot of our polytechnics being converted to universities, which defeats the purposes for which these polytechnics were established for. So we need to go back to that, have our polytechnics, have our colleges of education to train quality teachers and have sound educational system that can serve society.
Back to the loan.
Okay.
The students' loan.
Yep.
How does government plan to fund this? Where is the money going to come from that they're going to give to the students?
That's a very good question. I wish I could answer that.
One of the things that was said, maybe but you may want to speak to this, is there's going to be an education bank. And there's going to be a board, and there's going to be some processes and all of that. Okay. Perhaps the challenge, which he's asking about, is the sustainability. Well, yes, the law also says that FIRS
the devil is in the details again.
Yes, FIRS is going to contribute 1%.
The devil is going to be very busy while they're working on this.
You know, but you know, perhaps the reason that question is being asked is the sustainability of it. Because yes, it's a law, but hey, we have quite a number of laws that are just that.
It's on paper.
Yeah. So here is the thing. Currently, there is the education tax that is levied.
So that will go to the education bank.
Industries in this country. And that goes to tertiary education trust fund, TED fund, which ordinarily should help to fund research and infrastructure in our universities. And one way the government could tackle this or could implement this law is to either levy additional 1% of education tax that goes into the education bank or whatever bank is they're going to set up to serve as the loan to serve the purpose of administering the students' loan scheme. Then the other option for them, which I've seen work everywhere else, is to just serve as a collateral for students to borrow from existing commercial banks.
Okay. Okay.
So if the federal government was to serve as a collateral for this for the students, then the students can approach commercial banks and borrow and get loans to fund their education, but not with interest and not at the rate at which commercial banks will lend to others who are into business.
Interesting.
Then the other point that can be made is that the government also ought to encourage parents to begin to think about setting up education funds for their wards. I know.
That is funny, Professor.
I'm not even going to go into that
people,
one.
These are, I mean, because to qualify for this loan in the first place, your parents or your guardians must not earn more than 500,000. So if these are people of that caliber, how are they going to establish education funds for their children?
Well, not necessarily for those who are earning 500,000 or below, but it's just a general statement that Nigerians ought to be thinking about that. But at the same time, I think saying that people should have a benchmark of 500,000 or less to qualify for the loan is not bad in itself. And the reason why I said it is not bad in itself is that it means a lot of people will qualify, actually, if they are able to demonstrate that their household doesn't make less than 500,000 more than 500,000 a year. So a lot of households in Nigeria will qualify for the loan. But in addition to the loan, the government ought to do something else, which is scholarships and grants. We used to have a scholarship board in this country in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of people benefited from that. So we ought to be thinking about setting up scholarship boards, not only at the federal level, but also at the state level. State governments should also take on the mantle of leadership in this. Because funding education is not just a federal issue. It is a state issue, and it is a local issue, local government issue.
Okay, very interesting. The state governments, the same state governments that are yet to pay salaries? Don't answer that one. So let me ask you this one. Part of the issues that we have raised here now borders around along the issues of funding for the tertiary institutions and all of that. It's interesting that that is an issue. So if the students are now paying tuition in the universities, expectedly, the universities will have enough money to pay the university lecturers, improving their infrastructure. Is that a fair assumption?
No.
Okay. So what do they need to pay school fees for?
Tuition is good.
Because that's what the student loan, is primary.
Yeah, a lot of my friends will be disappointed in me saying this, that students will have to pay something to get an education. But at the same time, we should also remember that tuition is not what sustains universities.
Okay.
So universities ought to be looking elsewhere to see how they can have a sustainable stream of funding.
Not necessarily from government.
Not necessarily from the government. Actually, which is why I made the point earlier on that the universities ought to be connected to industries.
Now don't give them the consultancy for free. Let them come and pay for it. But the reason I asked that question is, so essentially the tuition fees is a stream of income, not the...
No, it's just a stream.
It's a stream, fine. However, how do you bring that together with the position of ASU, Academic Staff Union of Universities, and SANO, Senior Staff Association of Nigerian Universities, saying they are kicking against the student loan program, saying that it is going to make many people not want to go to school, that those who cannot even feed themselves are now going to be imprisoned or captured by some kind of loan. What do you make of their position on that?
I don't agree with that position at all, which is why I said many of my colleagues will be disappointed in what I'm saying. So I don't agree with that. I think ASU ought to rethink their position on that. Students should pay. Students should pay something to get an education.
But the students already pay something already because they pay for handouts.
Yeah,
that's not going to the pocket of the university.
Hey, I said they pay for handouts. The students don't know where it goes.
Yeah, that is also another issue where I wouldn't like to go into.
Please don't go into it.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that we need to think about how university education is funded. I can use my own university as an example, the University of Michigan, which is the #1 public university in the United States, and among the top 20 best universities in the world. But it's a state-owned university. It is owned by the state of Michigan. But at the same time, less than 5% of our budget comes from the state. And tuition, it's about, I think, less than $300 million a year. But the annual budget for research alone at my university runs over $4 billion. So the question is, where does the university get its money from?
As I said.
Which is why I said the connection between industries and universities.
That's a job you have just given ASU. But, so speaking to that now, because we're rounding off.
We're rounding down.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're rounding?
We're closing in a minute.
Okay.
Thank you.
So where do we go from here? You've given an assignment to the academia, you've given an assignment to states, and you have also charged the federal government. How about the students?
Well, the students, my charge to the students is for them to think outside the box. And thinking outside the box means taking their education seriously and also focusing on what the future holds for them. I know it's a big issue, particularly when you don't know what tomorrow holds, but at the same time, your future is in your hands, and how you mold it is what becomes profitable for you in future.
Prof.
Yeah.
Professor of Anthropology and
Law. Just one more. You've only talked about tuition fees.
Yeah.
They also have to take care of accommodation, their feeding, and other things.
That's what they need the loan for.
Barely. No, the loan is for tuition. They can barely survive on whatever it is that they're getting. So what would be your counsel to them in that regard?
I think every student should work on campus. And that is what is applicable all over in most of the institutions that I'm familiar with. Yeah. In my university, however rich your parents are, you come to campus and you still work.
Yes.
So I think our university system should create an enabling environment that can give jobs to students on campus, so that it's also a training for them. It's a skill acquisition for them. So, because you don't just graduate from a university with an empty CV or empty resume. You ought to have something that you've done while studying.
So you can actually build a resume while studying. Interesting.
Yeah. Do we have 1 minute? I can, there was a year I came to do research in Nigeria. I hired a student to be my research assistant. Then when she graduated, she started looking for a job, and she asked if I could help her connect her to jobs with my friends. Then I said, send me your CV. And I looked at the CV, it was blank. I said, but you served as my research assistant. Why didn't you have that in your CV?
Yeah.
And she said, oh, I didn't know. that I should. So that is the thing. So our university system needs to think about that. Hiring graduates, or hiring students to do jobs on campus.
Professor of Anthropology and Law, Professor Omolade Adumbi, thank you very much for coming to talk about this education loan fund with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Sunrise will be right back in just a moment for the lifestyle segment. And we're talking about...
Okay, so that's our topic. Common mental health disorders and their remedies.
When a child is going through a lot at 14, she must have some mental health issues, yeah?
So there's someone here to help us define a lot.
You're not paying house rent. You're not paying school fees for anybody. You're not paying for the food you eat. You're not paying for your transportation to school. Yet you're going through a lot.
Okay. Dr. Miracle Ehoma is with us. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. He's a clinical psychologist.
Thank you.
Define a lot.
Coming from a 14-year-old.
A lot is plenty things.
Plenty things.
So I like you to decrypt that because she has a point. And you have also corroborated it before that when anyone says they're going through a lot, they're actually going through a lot. But a good number of us are wondering, what are you talking about? You're just 14. Or even a 20-year-old that is just transiting from, maybe it's from
school, university,
school to back home, or even from, in some cases, from secondary school to university. You say you're going through a lot. Was there a lot?
Well, I think that would be the best people to tell us what that a lot means. But
from your experience,
yes,
what can it mean?
It could mean it could be a variety of things actually. Yeah, from where you're sitting or standing, you might think that okay, what are you going? You're not paying house rent, you are not feeding anyone, and all of that. But they could be going through peer pressure. They could be going through. They could be going through academic issues. They could be going through societal pressure as well. You know, for instance, I had an experience with a young boy at about, I think the guy was maybe 17 years old. And then he was also talking about something like this, going through a lot. And for him, the issue was that he had friends who were involved with internet fraud. And they were already looking a type of way. They had things they didn't have. You know, they had money.
Conflict.
And yeah, so he started having that internal conflict. Like, okay, what's up with me?
Should I join them?
Should I join them? Should I not join them? Look at what my friends have. Look at what I'm deprived of. So for him, that was a phase and something he had to decrypt, like you said.
That was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot.
It's interestingly, the World Health Organization seems to have a code for it. They call them CMDs, common mental disorders. And it says depression and anxiety are the leading contributors to the global burden of disability. That is for disability. For you, what would you say are the common or most common mental disorders? Some of which people may not. We'll come back to mental disorders that people don't even know that they have, that they carry around. But what for you are these the most common that you say in our
society?
Yeah, I think that World Health Organization is correct because disability is wide range. Mental health disorders are also a part of disabilities, right? And depression and anxiety actually are the highest. Even in my personal practice, I've dealt with clients dealing with anxiety and depression more than any other mental health condition. So yes, personally, that's correct. And generally, according to World Health Organization, that's also correct because World Health Organization also said that there are about 970 million people who are dealing with a mental health condition, one mental health condition or the other. 970 million.
That's 1 billion.
That's about 1 billion, yes. Just 30 million short. Yeah. One in 8 people have a mental health
As at
condition.
what year was this?
Now look,
That was 2019.
But we don't reach 1 billion now.
Yes, it would have increased by now. And depression and anxiety are about 60% of that number.
Miracle,
Yeah.
can you please explain to us why we are seeing more of this now? People are talking a lot more about their mental health status now, more than ever before. Why is it?
I would say two things. The first is that people are becoming more aware. Awareness. People are they are beginning to know, okay, what mental health is. For instance, we have about, say, 3-4 generations. There's a generation Y, there is a generation X, and a generation on Z. And we have Alpha right now coming along. And the people who are most aware of their mental health, according to statistics and even my personal experience, is the Gen Z. They're the ones who seeks mental health support more than any other generation. So they are more aware. So people are more aware of their mental health. They know what mental health is. They know that it's okay for us to talk about it and things like that. That's one reason. The second reason is the complexities of our time. The complexities of our time are a bit more than it used to be, right? For instance, let me give an example. In your generation, sir, and man, and even me, kind of when I was growing up, if you wanted to watch pornography, how easy was it? It was complex to watch pornography. Number one, television starts showing at 4 p.m., right?
And shuts down after the news.
And then you even had to have a TV. And then you had to have a DVD for you to be able to watch pornography because phones were non-existent. So, and you had to be rich. You had to be middle class to have that. So the poor could not watch pornography. So you had to be middle class to watch porn. And then...
Which reduced their access.
The access to it.
And also reduced their frustration.
Exactly.
And also reduced their depression.
Yes, because for instance, an Italian cannot wake up tomorrow morning and feel like eating a forero and fufu because it is not in his repertoire. So what you are
not... 1% of them.
It's not in his repertoire. So if, for instance, you've not come across pornography, you don't know what you are missing. You don't know what you're missing, right? So for us, it was a bit difficult then, right? And of course, sometimes you had to do it in groups. So okay, you have you have DVD and you have TV. So we'll come to your house to watch it at a time when your parents are out of the house and when your siblings are not in the house. Right? But right now, if I want to watch pornography right now, just at the clink of my finger, I have access to over 1 million sites of pornography.
Even the ones that don't want to watch.
Even the ones that don't want to watch.
I remember an experience. I was heading the library of a broadcast organization, so the digital library. So the days of pop-ups were wild. So for whatever reason, I just got into my office, and it was the organization's system. I just got into my office. As soon as I powered it up, right on your face. So even if you don't want to watch it, the pop-ups are also there. Making even the much younger children vulnerable.
Yeah. So those are the two reasons it seems
Let me say something. When we were growing up, I don't think I ever heard of any case of any student committing suicide.
Okay.
So it would give the impression like that we didn't have mental health issues when we were growing up.
Okay.
Because we didn't hear of it, we didn't hear of depression, we didn't hear of people feeling like killing themselves. Kill yourself? What are you thinking of? It was like you had gone completely mad if you even spoke about it.
Yeah.
Of course, it didn't get talked about. It didn't get done. So why all this, should I say, much ado?
Yeah. It falls back to the same reasons I just mentioned, awareness and complexities. So, and okay, maybe a third reason, maybe the previous generation also had a bit more resilience. Right, and better coping mechanisms.
How so?
Yeah, because of course, right now with the advent of things like technology, social media, resilience of people are reduced. For instance, we have reduced attention span. People, want it quick and now. So if you're doing, in fact, if you do anything around video, they will tell you make it short because people don't have the time. They want short videos. Attention span is low.
Greatly reduced.
So all these things have affected our resilience and how much we are able to cope. I read in the newspaper some years back about a lady who was 17 years old and committed suicide. Why? Because she failed JAMB. That was her reason, and that was her first time of writing JAMB. Now, and I was like, okay, you failed JAMB and then you committed suicide.
Write it again.
I failed O-level 4 times. Not even JAMB, O-level 4 times. I failed JAMB.
So you should have killed yourself 4 times.
Exactly. But I didn't do that because it wasn't in my repertoire. It wasn't part of my options. I had better coping mechanisms. I had other ways to deal with situations like that.
Are you sure you didn't kill yourself a number of times before coming back? But
I won't be here.
You talked about depression being a major issue.
Yeah.
You may want to speak to one or two others that we may have, but on the website of the World Health Organization, for instance, we're seeing that one of the part of the signs, other symptoms of depression include poor concentration, feelings of excessive guilt, low self-worth, hopelessness about the future, thoughts about dying or suicide, disrupted sleep, changes in appetite or weight, and feeling especially tired or low in energy. Now, these are various levels, it would seem, of depression. I don't think many people watching and listening to you right now are aware that they're depressed.
True.
So, what would be your pointers to the people listening and watching right now on what to look out for in their lives?
Okay. So you've actually listed a lot of the symptoms of depression, right, that people don't know about. But for you to be diagnosed depressed, you have to exhibit the symptoms you've mentioned right now for most of the time for a period of 2 weeks.
Whoa.
Yeah. After which you would be diagnosed as depressed. So, because there's a difference between sadness and depression.
Can you be depressed without knowing that you are depressed?
Well, you will know. You will know. You might not just know because you will feel it.
You will not know it's depression.
You don't know it's depression.
But you are depressed without knowing that you are.
Knowing.
That's that question
exactly.
she's making.
So if you are not aware, if you don't know about the symptoms, if you don't know things to look out for, you can be depressed and not know it's depression, but you would know how you're feeling. So you can tell somebody, I'm just, this is not my normal self, right? I'm somebody, for instance, who eats 1 bowl of rice. Now I'm eating 2, or I'm eating half. I sleep 6-7 hours before. Now I can barely have 4 hours of sleep. What's going on with me? I just get tired. I don't want to get out of bed all day. I just want to be in bed. So you will have those symptoms. But if you are now aware that those are symptoms of depression, then you can then know that, okay, this is what is called depression. Yeah, you can seek help.
It sounds like eating disorder is another case altogether, right? Because, again, I'm looking at the website of World Health Organization. It says in 2019, 14 million people experienced eating disorders, including almost 3 million children and adolescents. Yeah. And it says it gave some names to, eating disorders and all of that. Now, you talked about eating disorder as a sign of depression. It begins for me with consciousness of the fact that you are eating a little more. People don't even know. They just do these things on impulse. Is there a way to manage it, and not get to that point of manifesting this trait of depression?
Well, early detection is something that is very important. So if you are able to detect it as early as possible so that you can nip it in the bud, it's very, very important and will go a long way, because a lot of the people who because when it comes to mental health conditions or disorders, they are actually in a range, in a continuum. So many times they are grouped into mild, moderate, severe, and sometimes extremely severe. So if the reason a lot of people grow from mild to extremely severe is because they don't detect it early. Or sometimes they notice it and just excuse it away. Some people will say, "Oh, black man they get mental health issue," you know. So they don't do anything about it, you know, and just allow it to go. And then it keeps happening. Just like if you have an injury in a particular sport, and then something keeps reopening that injury, it gets to a point where it becomes irredeemable in that sense. That's how people get to that extreme position where they begin to now manifest outright and obvious symptoms for everybody to know that, okay, this person is dealing with this thing. So it's important to detect it as early as you can and then seek help.
So awareness is very important.
Awareness
you need to know yourself.
Awareness.
You've spoken a lot about depression. How about anxiety? What are the signs for that one?
Yeah, anxiety. Now, one thing about mental health conditions is that they are grouped in umbrellas. So depression, for instance, is a disorder under a group of disorders called mood disorders, because there are other mood disorders apart from anxiety, apart from depression rather. So anxiety is also that umbrella. So we have anxiety disorders, where we have things like phobia. Phobias are examples of anxiety, some anxiety disorders, where we have things like
it's a disorder, is it?
Yeah, phobias. Yeah.
Is somebody confessing something to you right now?
I can't look at a snake on TV.
You can't look at the TV?
I can't look at a snake on TV.
On the TV. Oh,
yes.
You're not the only one. Neither can my wife.
It's a phobia. So is it a disorder?
It's a phobia. So it is a type of anxiety. So that, of course, it's not like, it might not really affect your functioning. So it's not really affecting.
I just can't look at it. So once it comes, I go away.
So to be clear,
yes,
what you just said now in response to her brings that up. To be clear, these significant mental disorders have to be such that they alter your life or alter your lifestyle.
Yes,
One way or another.
They affect your cognitive, emotional, and behavioral functions. Cognitive, the way you think. Emotions, the way you feel. Behavioral, the way you act. Yeah. So
if you have a sustained way of acting, and then after some time that pattern of behavior is altered, then you need to go see a doctor.
Yes.
Wow.
I call it deviation from norm. It's a major sign you want to look out for.
Wrong.
Even for your loved ones, you want to, it's something you want to, even as a parent, deviation from norm. A person is behaving this type of way and then over time deviates and starts behaving something else.
Perhaps this is please make a call if you can to parents, guardians, even the owners of business owners, supervisors of staff in organizations. Because you hear this from time to time, usually he's not like that. All of a sudden, something happened. What would you be telling them to act on right now?
Yeah. So it's important that they get some form of mental health education. Yeah. So that's for instance, there's a training I do with line managers in organizations, right? That help line managers to be able to detect when people are going through, one thing or the other, and also provide some form of first aid intervention before if they need to now pass them on to a professional, because it's important that you know the symptoms of these things, know when a worker, a staff, a child, is going through a lot, right? Yeah, because sometimes if you are not aware, you will replace, instead of empathy, you give judgment. You will say, this child, what's wrong with you? Why are you behaving like a fool? Why are you behaving like this? Can't you behave yourself? This is how your mates behave. If it's in the workplace, you will say, what's wrong with you? You give them a query. You can even give them suspension, not knowing that they are going through something beyond their control. But if you are aware, if you are educated, you will provide empathy.
Okay. You conclude your thoughts on anxiety.
Yes. So on anxiety, we now have different. So we have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which is a common form of anxiety. We have general anxiety disorder as well. So there are many anxiety disorders that we have under anxiety disorders. And anxiety disorders are actually the most popular of all the disorders, followed by depression.
So my fear of snakes, for instance, is an anxiety disorder.
It's a manifestation of anxiety, yes.
Okay, so
No, but you don't want to use the
I
word
don't use
disorder.
the word disorder for that.
until diagnosed.
Yes, because it's like I said, for it to be called a disorder, it has to impair
Alter your
and
lifestyle.
alter your thinking pattern,
Okay.
emotions, and then behavior.
Okay.
Even though phobia can, when you are presented with that particular thing you are scared of, it can alter the way you're thinking because phobias are irrational fear.
Fear of heights?
Irrational. Somebody's afraid of heights. There's nothing to be afraid of heights for.
Oh, really?
It doesn't pose any imminent
They will be
danger.
calling you. Like,
Exactly.
So are you afraid of heights?
it will be calling you like this.
Shebi,
Okay, all the
he
people,
wants you to jump.
the people who are afraid of heights.
Yes.
How many times
Have they
have
jumped?
they fallen?
We are too afraid to fall.
So nothing at the end of the day happens.
No,
So
the point is, you literally have to get a hold of yourself to prevent yourself from doing it.
Yes. So that's why it's irrational. Why it's irrational is because there is no imminent danger for you to be
What's this
scared
man
or
talking
afraid
about?
of.
What is this man talking about?
No.
This height has
Yes.
no railing, has no barricade, nothing to
The
hold
people
me.
who are scared of heights, even when there's a railing, they are scared. I know of somebody who he cannot even there's a railing that's as tall as this ceiling right now.
Yeah.
He can't look down because of the height.
What are you
So there's no
doing?
imminent
Because
danger
he
right
immediately feels dizzy.
there. Well, maybe not. Like, for you, for instance, you said you are scared of snake even from the TV.
Yes.
Now, is that rational in the sense that
The snake coming out to bite
the snake will not come out from the TV to bite you? There's no imminent danger.
Except
There's
when-
nothing to be scared of.
Unless
So that is a real irrational fear.
Yes,
Unless
it's
when
irrational.
Unless when it's 7D TV, that is the snake can.
But even on 70, you can't come out.
So this one about the height,
Yes.
I don't get it because those of us who are scared of heights,
Are you so scared of height, man?
yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
It's like something is calling you to jump.
Okay.
It's in your brain. Or you try and look down and immediately you swoon because you immediately go dizzy.
Yeah.
It's like you're going to fall off it,
Yeah.
even though you're not making any step towards falling over. That's what you feel.
Yes, based on how you think, because feelings in themselves are not self-generated. Every feeling you have is powered by thought. Yes.
I don't get. The first time I realized I was on the 22nd floor of a house, I went to the window and immediately I felt dizzy. So I had to move back. I said to myself, oh, you can't go near any window in this house.
Okay, you know what's going to happen? She needs consultancy. But anyway, let's have this conversation.
But I'm not the only person who feels that way.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
but for many people who are scared of heights, they might not really feel the way you feel. I've encountered a few of them. They don't feel, it's not like they feel dizzy.
So essentially you're saying
They're just scared that, okay, they might fall off or...
and if they fall, the consequences
exactly.
is what's
that's
scary.
the rationale
It happens to
behind
Okay.
that
Which,
fear.
which is why I asked the question the other time. There are a good number of people who have these anxiety disorder, these mental disorders, or you know how they call it, semblance, as you said, you know, to her, that are not even aware that these things are significant for concern, and it builds up over time, and it becomes something serious.
Yes.
Now you're telling her that, you know, it's not as serious as she fears. But then for some people, it has built up over time so severely that it has begun to impact their lives. What happens in that regard?
Yes, so of course at that point you will need to consult with a professional to help you, because yes, like I said, it is because our minds, our brain cannot differentiate between imagination and reality. That is why, that is why you can be watching a TV right now or a movie. You know this actor, you know that he's still alive, you know he's well and breathing, but then he or she dies in the movie, and then you start crying. Or something bad happens to them in the movie, you start crying. You know this acting because somehow you've lied to your brain that what you're watching is real.
What brain did I use to lie to my brain?
Yeah, so you deceive your brain. Your brain can be deceived, is what I'm saying.
The brain lying to the brain.
Your brain can be deceived because your brain cannot differentiate between imagination and reality. So your brain can be deceived. So you can tell your brain something right now, and then it believes
it.
And then, of course, because your brain affects, and determines behavior. So it affects how you see life and then how you relate with it.
Why are you reminding me of the Indian film Nagin? Had plenty of snakes. You just heard.
Will you please behave yourself? What is it to be bipolar? That's another word that came upon us maybe about 10, 15, 20 years ago, which we didn't know anything about when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Suddenly, every other person is bipolar.
Yeah. Bipolar is also a mood disorder, right? It's an oscillation between depression and what we call mania. Mania is simply the opposite of depression. Why depression is low mood, mania is excitable mood, elated mood, right? So when someone has a bipolar disorder or bipolar condition, they oscillate between depression and that. So at this time, they are sad, moody, and all of that. At this other time, they are irritable, excited, talkative, and all of that.
Do they remember that they were just sad just a moment ago?
That's why it's a disorder. Disorders, mental health disorders have common similarities with physical health disorders.
Do they know that they were sad a moment ago?
Well, they would know, but it's something they can't control. That's why it's a disorder. So they know that they were sad a moment ago, but now they are like this.
And they don't know why.
And they don't know why.
So there's no middle of the road for them.
Yeah, so they keep oscillating between both poles. That's what's called
bipolar. How significantly does that affect life?
Of course. It affects because one of the things that affect is relationships, your relationship with people. Because imagine you are married, then this time your husband is excited, or your wife is excited, And in fact, that excitability is even somewhat extreme, because they are excited to a point where they become very energetic. They become very extroverted. They can even begin to talk too much, right? And things like that. And then the next moment, they're all to themselves. They are moody, they are sad, they are feeling down.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a fear to express. No, not phobia, not mania.
Okay.
But the fact that the likelihood of parents transferring these things consciously or unconsciously to their children, is that a thing?
Well, transferring would not be the word I would use.
Okay.
Yes, for genetic, because I think I said last time I was here that mental health disorders, the causes of mental health disorders are generally biological, psychological, and sociological. So yes, for biological, it can be transferred via genes,
such as
via DNA. Any mental health disorder, both eating disorders, can be transferred via
So
DNA.
if my daddy was eating too much?
No, well, eating too much is not eating disorder. It's
a mental
more
disorder.
about how they feel when they are eating, not about the food in itself. Yeah, because for eating disorder, for instance, there are many types of eating disorder. The two most popular are anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. Anorexia nervosa is a feeling of when somebody feels like they're adding too much weight. So they do everything possible to make sure that they avoid food, they avoid calories and things like that. In fact, when they eat, they can go and vomit. They can purge just to get off the food, to get the food off their system. Now, even though this person might be very thin, they still have that feeling
like too big.
Okay, they are too big or they are going to get big. So that's anorexia nervosa. For bulimia nervosa, they engage in binge eating. They just eat uncontrollably. And after eating for a while, they get to a point where they feel like, okay, I'm going to get big. This is going to affect my weight. And then they also involve in purging behavior as well, right?
It is a disorder indeed. It has to be a disorder.
To purge off the food they have eaten.
It just has to be a disorder. In fact, it is a mental disorder.
Some of these things can be prevented, right?
Yes, they can.
How?
They can be prevented.
Which ones can be prevented and how does one prevent them?
Yeah, all mental health disorders can be prevented.
Start with depression and anxiety, the most prominent ones.
Okay. Okay, well, it's like I said, it still has to fall back to the foundation, psychosocial model, to say, okay, we don't have control over biology, right? Things like DNA, even though sometimes we do, because things like drugs, for instance, can induce some of these things or can trigger them, and drug is biological, right, in that sense. So, but there are other things that we can do, because even though people, just like let me give you an instance. So for physical health, if someone's parents, say, dealt with diabetes or hypertension in their lifetime, there's a possibility that the children might also get to have it in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same thing with mental health disorder. But it doesn't mean they will end up having it. Mm-hmm. It's just a possibility, a propensity. They may have it, depending on their lifestyle. The same thing too with mental health disorder. Lifestyle would also determine if some of these things will be prevented or not. So if there's a particular mental health disorder in your family, then you want to make sure that your lifestyle is geared in a way that would prevent you from having that particular disorder.
Essentially, you are saying that people should go and study their genealogical history to know, okay, because, when some people, when they want to get married, they say, go and trace their family.
Yes, we used to do that. And that was very effective.
Yes.
Yes, because it showed patterns of behavior. And many times those things were true. Yeah, because when you see people marry from those families, you now see that there's a repetition of those patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So even though our parents just did it out of maybe spiritual or whatever implications, they had mental health implications.
Well, common mental disorders, let's call this one part 1. Because we barely scratched the surface, but it is something that needs to be put out. Thank you so much this morning for coming. Dr. Miracle Ihoma is a clinical psychologist. And with that, we have come to the end of the... come back home, come back home.
As they say in our industry, it's a wrap. We'll see you next time with another edition, another very interesting edition, I might add. My name is Alero Edu, wishing you a happy weekend and all the best till we meet next week.
As you can see, she started meditating on the things that she's heard. You do the same. I'm good. Amaya Makide, have a wonderful rest of your weekend.